Any scattered showers over the Midlands and eastern England soon fading away, so most will have a dry night, and for many it'll be a clear night once more. And again, with generally light winds, we are going to see temperatures tumbling, a hint of blue there on the chart. So in rural areas, a frost is likely across parts of northern England and Scotland for sure. Even further south, some pockets of frost in rural areas are possible. Gardeners, take note. A chilly start then again tomorrow morning, but generally dry and a bright start with plenty of sunshine. We'll cloud over a bit through the day, and again, it's these eastern areas that could be quite glum and quite gloomy. And again, here it will be quite chilly for the time of year. Temperatures only 10, 11, 12 at best. Whereas further west with a bit of sunshine, 15, 16, maybe a little bit higher in one or two spots. High pressure continues to dominate, but it is sinking south, sitting pretty much slap bang across the UK for the second half of this week, continuing to keep things dry, but continuing with a risk of nighttime frosts.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Gloria Di Piero, on your TV and on your radio. Coming up between now and 10 o'clock, I'll be joined by the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, which has stated today that drink spiking will remain an invisible offence unless action is taken to improve awareness. I'll also be speaking to one MP who is backing a new whistleblowing bill that could see companies fined millions for attempted cover-ups. And is your town as generous as Chichester to Ukrainian refugees? A local journalist will be here to tell us why they're leading the way when it comes to supporting those fleeing the conflict. All of that after your morning news.
A very good morning. It's 9:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date today on GB News. Now, Russia's foreign minister is accusing NATO of waging a proxy war in Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov says weapons sent to Kyiv by the West are legitimate targets. But the UK Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says individual countries are supplying military aid, not NATO. His comments come as Germany agrees to send Kyiv anti-aircraft systems, particularly to Ukraine. The Prime Minister is expected to urge his cabinet to come up with innovative ideas to help ease financial pressures on households during a meeting this morning. The government's renewing its push to promote the existing package of support instead of relying on new spending. Heathrow Airport has been hit by more than £4 billion in losses as a result of the pandemic and will make another loss this year. Demand for travel is still volatile. Passenger numbers are currently 65% of pre-COVID levels. Rising fuel costs, reduced disposable income, the war in Ukraine and the ongoing pandemic are all being blamed. The Speaker of the House of Commons is going to meet the editor of the Mail on Sunday over an article about the Deputy Labour leader, which has widely been condemned as sexist. An anonymous Conservative MP was quoted as saying that Angela Rayner used her legs to distract Boris Johnson during Prime Minister's questions. The Speaker of the House has described it as misogynistic and offensive. The number of children in the UK with hepatitis has now risen to 114, according to the Wealth Organisation. 10 of them have needed a liver transplant. The UK Health Security Agency say most of the cases of liver inflammation are in under fives. Experts are still trying to understand the cause of the spike in hepatitis. You're now up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now let's head to this morning's briefing, today with Gloria.
Good morning, it's 9:35. This is a briefing with me, Gloria Piero, on your TV and radio. The war in Ukraine is now entering its 9th week with no diplomatic solution in sight. The British government has continued to provide military and humanitarian aid to the besieged nation, with Defence Secretary Ben Wallace promising to continue offering support. Earlier on breakfast, Eamon and Isabel were joined by Armed Forces Minister James Heapy. Take a look.
Secretary-General is seeking to mediate and bring about some resolution. The order in which the visit happens, I think, is probably a moot point. But in the meantime, it's for those of us who believe in Ukraine's right to sovereignty and the restoration of its territory to continue to support them in the way that we've been. And if the UN can bring about a resolution through diplomatic means, then that's to be encouraged. This week alone, we are sending there's 14 armoured vehicles that have arrived. There's some precision missile systems. There's 1,000 medium-range anti-tank weapon systems. There's 4,000 night sights. So that's just another week in the work of the MOD. Some of that stuff we will have only decided to send last week and was ready available. Other stuff will have been weeks in gestation to get it ready to ship. Thereafter, obviously, there is a job of work to do with the Ukrainian armed forces to train them in how to use the systems effectively, and thus far that's been spectacularly successful. And the Ukrainian courage is amazing, but it's I know the men and women of the British Armed Forces are hugely proud to have played a part in their training. And then, of course, there are supply lines within Ukraine, which, now that the conflict is in the far east of Ukraine, are very long supply lines indeed. And but that's the Ukrainian part of the puzzle. We're speaking to them, we're advising them, we're helping them as much as we can, but fundamentally it's for them to get the stuff from countries in Eastern Europe across to the Donbass. I mean, almost everything that we are providing requires, but particularly if it's a weapon system, requires some degree of training. A lot of that is happening in Poland. Some of it is happening in the UK. There are people here training on how to operate the armoured vehicles that we are sending, and I think the next tranche of them will arrive soon. In the next few weeks, Navy to Navy training will start. So whether it's happening in the UK or in Poland, there's lots of training activity happening. And who knows, as the situation in Western Ukraine develops and becomes more stable, it may be possible to restart training in Western Ukraine as well, but that'll be a decision for the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary once the conditions allow. Everything that we're doing in this building and within the Foreign Office and across government is around calibration. It's about calibrating what is the right thing to do for Ukraine given how the conflict is developing. Some of the big gear changes in UK policy and indeed policy around the rest of the donor community correlate directly to outrages that the Russians have committed within Ukraine. So Bucha and Irpin was a moment when German policy noticeably changed, and Ben Wallace, my boss, made a decision to commit weapon systems that we hadn't previously thought that we would. NATO is not the donor community. NATO is reinforcing the alliance's eastern flank as a defensive measure to reassure our Eastern European allies. NATO is not the donor community. Many of the people in the donor community are NATO countries, but similarly, Australians, the Kiwis and others are part of it as well.
That was Armed Forces Minister James Heappey speaking a little earlier. Now, a new whistleblowing bill that could see companies fined millions of pounds for attempted cover-ups is being considered for debate in Parliament today. The new proposals have been backed by several MPs and would protect whistleblowers from criminal and civil action being taken against them. It's received positive cross-party support. Joining me now is Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare, backing the new proposals, John Penrose. Good to see you. Welcome.
Hi, Gloria.
So, the problem is you blow the whistle on bad practice at work and it's you that ends up paying the price by ending up in an employment tribunal or damaging your career. Is that basically the problem?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the difficulty is that you get people who are trying to do the right thing and they end up losing, and they end up being, in some cases, being horribly monstered and losing their entire livelihoods, their careers, some cases their marriage and their homes and everything else as well. All for trying to do the right thing. So what you've got to try and do is create an environment where they're better protected, where they know that if they do take this important, sometimes life-changing step, that they're going to have, someone's going to have their back. And so that's what we need to do. Interestingly, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, British laws on this stuff were sort of world-class, but the rest of the world's caught up, perhaps overtaken us. And it's clear now that we've been left behind. It's time for an upgrade, basically.
Do you have in mind particular institutions or places which would benefit from these proposals and benefit us all? I'm thinking perhaps of public services.
Well, in fact, it's interesting. Almost any company or profession that's got a sort of strong culture to it, a professional culture, a corporate culture, can be vulnerable to this notion of sort of trying to reject the whistleblower, trying to exclude them, trying to ostracize them and monster them. So not just the public sector, it's not just the private sector, it's right the way through our society. These protections are absolutely needed. But yeah, you're right. We want to, there are lots of different ways of doing this, but making those changes perhaps with an office for the whistleblower, but there are other ways of doing it, just to make sure that ultimately it actually helps our law enforcement and investigations people in the police and other crime fighting institutions, because whistleblowers are a key source of information. If you've got someone coming forward with evidence, it just makes the investigators' lives a million times easier. It increases your rate of detection and ultimately makes everybody safer.
How would they be protected? People who blow the whistle, what sort of protections are you seeking for them?
Well, so there's a couple of things we need to do. One is, I think we need to extend the range of the kinds of people who are protected. Quite a lot of protection already in place for direct employees, people on a salary. But what happens if you're a supplier to a company where you see something that's difficult or dangerous going on? What happens if you are a non-exec director on the board, so you're not technically an employee? So we need to broaden the range of people who are protected. And we also need to make sure that it's really, really clear that companies need to have the right systems in place, the right processes in place, and if necessary, professional bodies need to have doctors, nurses, but also lawyers, accountants and others. They all need to have the right processes in place so that when someone does blow the whistle, when something like this does happen, they don't have to invent it all from scratch. It's ready-made and ready for people to do, to say, all right, this person's blown the whistle, they've done it in the right way. Here's what we now know we've got to do in order to protect this person, to stop them being monstered and destroyed. And it's all there sitting in the bottom of a drawer somewhere. You just take it out, you can follow the process, and you know you're doing the right thing.
Let's talk about non-disclosure agreements. I think they're also in your site. So this is basically, you get a payout for basically keeping silent when you leave a workplace. Do some people quite like them, the payout, and think it's a price worth paying to keep quiet?
I don't know. I mean, quite possibly some do. I think that it's a really fraught moral area, as you can imagine, because there's, particularly if there's something dangerous going on, which actually it's in all our interests, it's in society's interests to make sure it doesn't happen. You don't want to have potential witnesses being sort of paid off. That's not something which you want to have happen. So what you want to do is to change the equation so that it always pays to do the right thing, to be a whistleblower when you see something wrong. And that obviously may mean that some non-disclosure agreements become moot, just you shouldn't apply. But you've got to make sure that you've got the protections in place before you start going after the non-disclosure agreements, so that people know they're going to be protected.
And this is being brought forward by a backbench MP, but from what I've read, it seems the government are in favour, want to push this through. But realistically, it's all about timing, isn't it? And is this going to be at the top of the government's legislative programme, or is it something that they'll get round to tomorrow, whenever mañana, if you like?
I'm waiting for a government minister to say mañana at the dispatch box. That will be a parliamentary moment. But no, you're right. It's always a problem of time, of just getting space in the legislative timescale to do this sort of stuff. There is, however, some legislation coming up. There's an economic crime bill, which we're all hoping is going to be coming up in the next couple of months. You could put some whistleblowing clauses in that to sort of solve an awful lot of the problems that you and I are talking about here. So the time is now, the moment is available. So even if we can't get a full-blowing, whistleblowing bill act all sort of, stand alone, we might be able to get some of these things that you and I have been talking about into another piece of legislation quite soon, if the government is willing. And that's the reason why I'm supporting Mary Robinson's bill today, and I hope that it will attract some attention and perhaps get a bit of a following wind.
And just to bring this into real life, can you give us any examples of people who have blown the whistle and who have been, in your words, monsters as a result?
I probably shouldn't sort of name cases, but a quick internet search will show all sorts of sometimes heartrending stories about people who've lost everything. So I'm afraid it's all too common, and therefore, this is something which we do need to protect and make easy. As I said, it helps the police, it helps the investigators as well, but also there is a trail of broken lives of people who've tried to do the right thing and who've been badly mistreated. So I'm afraid there are too many to count. If I mention one or two, it won't be fair on the others.
And just tell us what happens under the current legislation if you do blow the whistle. What's a practical example of being monstered?
Well, so if you are a member of either a company with a strong corporate culture or an organisation with a strong organisational culture, or a member of a profession, what can happen is that basically your work dries up. You don't get given jobs to do, your income vanishes if you're a contractor or a consultant or something like that. Your colleagues and people you thought were your friends don't talk to you anymore, they don't trust you anymore. You may find yourself being pursued through an employment tribunal for effectively what some of your colleagues will think of as betraying secrets for the organisation, whether it's a public sector organisation or a company. So you end up losing your job, you end up losing quite a lot of your friends, you end up losing most of your income, and that can mean that you lose your house. It can mean that your relationships break down because the stress can be very, very serious indeed. Now, all of that is solvable if you have a system where you know that somebody's got your back and that the organisations and the professions concerned know that they can't behave that way, and that there's a sort of how-to programme that says, here's the right way to treat a whistleblower, here's the right thing to do. And if we get people who then have confidence that if they do the right thing, it's not going to happen that way, and they're going to be looked after, and they're going to still be able, if you've trained all your life to be anything from a quantity surveyor through to a medic, that's what you know, that's what you do. And if you are in mid-career and suddenly it all dries up, you need to know that you're going to be protected from that, and that you're going to carry on being able to earn a living having done the right thing. And so that's where we need to get to stop those kinds of, I'm afraid, very human, very understandable, but ultimately really unacceptable, but all too common things from happening.
Your regulator, if these proposals come into law, won't they? Just explain the role of the regulator and the penalties that companies might be subject to if they flout the regulator.
Yeah. So I mean, this particular version of the bill would propose a regulator. You could do it other ways if you needed to, but this is a pretty good set of suggestions. And this suggests an office of the whistleblower, which basically says, look, the office of the whistleblower will say, here's how to do it right. If you're a company, if you're a public sector organisation, if you're a charity, here's the right way to do it. Please follow these guidelines. They'll talk to professional standards bodies and regulators and make sure that they've got the equivalent set of rules as well. But so just to make sure that you know it doesn't matter what you do and where you work, the chances of your organisation and your profession reacting the right way are just massively higher once these guidelines are all out there. But even if you are unlucky enough to work in a profession or an organisation that doesn't have this in place yet, or it isn't doing the right thing, then the Office of the Whistleblower is kind of a sort of backstop organisation where you can go directly to them if you have to, and they will fill in any gaps that still remain for any organisations or professions that aren't doing the right thing. So it's kind of a sort of raising the standard for everybody, and a backstop for any gaps or omissions that are still left. You could do it other ways, but it's a pretty good starting point. And if ministers think they've got a better way of dealing with this particular problem, I'm sure we'd be all ears. But the important thing is you've got to have something that basically changes this equation so people know they're going to be looked after if they do the right thing.
Conservative MP John Penrose, thanks for joining us. A very thorough explanation of what you're trying to do. Thank you. Now we are joined by the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. That's because today they've released a report warning that spiking will remain an invisible crime unless more is done to improve awareness and support victims. A report published today found that 9 out of 10 people said they did not receive support after having their drinks spiked with either drugs or alcohol. Home Office has confirmed they're looking into making spiking a specific criminal offence, and venues risk losing their licence if they do not clamp down on spikers. Joining me now is Dame Diana Johnson, Labour MP and Chair of the Home Affairs Committee. Thank you for bearing with our tech, Diana. It's really good to see you. For those who are not familiar with the term, just let us know how your committee has defined spiking.
Well, spiking can be putting an extra shot in someone's alcoholic drink or soft drink when they haven't asked for it. That could be spiking. It can also be adding a drug to a drink, a soft drink or an alcoholic drink. And more recently, we've seen this new phenomenon of spiking by injection. So people having something injected into their arms or legs, often on the dance floor or in a nightclub. And that seems to have taken off at the end of last year when the students went back to university, and we saw, I think the police have estimated over 1,000 reports of that new type of spiking.
The report refers to victim blaming. Can you tell us a bit more about what you find there and what you mean by victim blaming?
Well, I think this is one of the core problems actually around spiking, that people who have had their drinks spiked or had an injection that they haven't agreed to, obviously, they find themselves, reporting it to the bar staff or to the door staff at a nightclub, or perhaps going to A&E, or even going to the police. And there's often a view that it's someone who's had a bit too much to drink and it's their fault, if you like. So there is a problem with making sure that people feel confident enough to report, and that action will be taken if they feel that they've had their drinks spiked or been injected, and that there's support for them as well, because at the moment there is very little support for people who feel they've been had their drinks spiked. And we know that the consequences of spiking can be quite long lasting. Obviously, people can be very physically hurt and ill, but the longer term, the mental issues around, vulnerability, feeling you can't go out, don't want to go into crowded places, that can continue for some time. So it is a really pernicious offence to spike someone's drink.
Diana Johnson, Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll see you soon. Thank you. Now, a bit of lighter news. Chichester has emerged as the most generous area in the country for housing Ukrainian refugees. According to data from the Home Office, 222 visas have been granted for refugees to be housed in Chichester. The area in West Sussex has a population of more than 121,000 people. They've so far taken the highest number of refugees per head in the country. A West Sussex County Council spokesperson said, "Thank you to everyone across West Sussex who has come forward to offer their homes for refugees arriving from Ukraine. Our residents have been incredibly generous, as have many people across the country as a whole." Well, I'm happy to be joined now by journalist and writer for the Chichester Observer, Joe Stack. Joe, welcome to the programme. What's so special about Chichester? Do they have especially kind people, or is it because it's a pretty wealthy place and lots of people have spare rooms?
Well, there's the number of things, yeah. So this isn't the first time we've seen this sort of generosity from people in Chichester. But as you say, Chichester and West Sussex as a whole is quite an affluent part of the country. So I think people do have more space. It's rural. And last year we also reported that Chichester has one of the highest rates of vacant homes. So I think it kind of implies that there's lots of space for people to be inviting refugees to their homes. But as you say, this isn't the first time we've seen this generosity. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw huge community efforts to deliver aid and food to vulnerable people, and the same again with the outbreak of the Ukraine war. So it's a real mix of things, I think.
And has the number of refugees, has it had a noticeable effect on your community? Do you see those who have been fleeing this terrible war in the local cafes or on the high street?
No, not at the moment. I imagine, well, we know that some groups have been set up to kind of offer support to people because it can be a bit of a culture shock, especially coming from fleeing a war like it's happening. But we are seeing a couple of community groups being set up to offer support to those people. But we aren't seeing huge numbers around the town. I mean, it is 183 visas per 100,000 people, so it would need a lot more, I think, for us to start sort of feeling it.
And the scheme has had well-reported problems. Have you met any local people who have tried to take in refugees but have struggled with the red tape that's involved?
When it first came out, yes, we did have a few residents that were saying they were struggling with it. But I think after a while, and people kind of persevered with that, and those who persevered have kind of come out the other end and have succeeded, and others gave up.
Joe, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you for giving us an insight into life in Chichester. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys. But first, it is your weather.
Good morning, Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Chilly start out there today, and it won't be the last time this week. Things are pretty fresh to begin the day. Most of us having a dry day today. Some places seeing some sunshine, but others staying fairly cloudy. High pressure is in control, but the winds come round the high and sinking down from the north, hence why it is so chilly. The wind's not particularly strong, but bringing that cool feel, bringing quite a lot of cloud across eastern Scotland, northeast England this morning, with a few showers scattered about here too. That cloud will thicken up over all of northern England, pushing into parts of the Midlands and further south across eastern England too. Much of the south and west, although we will see some cloud developing through the day, staying dry and bright, and we could see some sunny spells at times across northern Scotland. But temperatures struggling under the cloud, 9, 10 at best in some spots. With some brighter weather further south and west, we should see temperatures into the mid-teens. Quite quickly though, temperatures